All right, we're going to talk a little bit about adaptogens in our first go round with medicinal herbs. Here's what it's going to look like. We're going to talk about a couple herbs each day for the next 3 weeks. This is going to be so cool. But in addition to that, I want you to have some context for those herbs. So instead of just saying, here's an herb and here's what it's good for, well, that's fun, but it's not as much fun as understanding the context for using the herbs. Then you're not so much memorizing an herb and actions. You're really more holistic because what you're understanding is where it's going and why you're using it. And so today we're going to start by talking about adaptogens. We're going to talk about ashwagandha and holy basil. But we'll start with this section on adaptogens. And so there's two parts. Today, part one is on adaptogens. Part two, in a different video, we'll cover briefly ashwagandha and holy basil. So get ready with those mini reports. Your first one on either ashwagandha or holy basil is due today. So let me actually make this into the slideshow that you want, like this. Oh, so much better, right? So much better. All right, so we're going to talk about adaptogens. First thing to understand is this idea of stress. Stress and what's called the HPA axis. So HPA stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals. And they work together to help your body manage stress. I don't know if you can see my hands down here. I always do this on the table. I'm like drawing around with my hands. Apparently, I cannot talk without using them. So if you see me doing stuff, you're not missing anything. I'm just moving my hands around on the table because that's, I guess, how I roll. All right, so handling stress. If your body can give you what you need to handle stress, isn't that awesome? And your HPA axis does this. Your body is designed to help you manage stress. Nobody has a stress-free life. It's just not how life is. Everybody runs into occasional stressors. The job that we have to learn is how do I reduce or limit or eliminate the stressors, and how do I, especially the big stressors, how do I just stop those from happening so much? And then some of the other stressors, things are going to happen and you deal with them, and the goal is to make them short term. So things like I'm always financially stressed. That's a problem that you want to solve. You don't want to live with that problem. You want to solve that problem. And so there are lots of resources out there to help you solve that problem. Similarly, I don't eat very well. Well, that's a problem to solve, not a problem to live with. And so while adaptogens can help you manage stress, your best bet is to fix problems using adaptogens as sort of a short-term help for that moment that will help your body get back to normal. So let me explain a little bit more about what this means. So the idea is you have the stressor, your body handles the stressor, and then you return to baseline or homeostasis. You get back to normal. Trouble happens when you don't solve the problem. And so adaptogens are not your method of not solving the problem and just dealing with it and living forever using adaptogens as a substitute for problem solving. They won't work very well for you because your body is not meant to live under chronic stress. Chronic stress will beat you down. And so the idea is that your body is meant to respond beautifully to stress and then recover. So because, you've solved the problem. So instead of setting off your stress all the time, look toward learning how to problem solve instead of giving up and just succumbing to being stressed. Adaptogens, however, can really, really help you protect against the effects of stress and protect in ways that normalize your body's reactions. Now, certainly we have lots of stressors that we have to deal with that we can't solve. Things like environmental, I don't want to say chemicals because everything is made up of chemicals. That's just silly to say some chemicals. But there are certainly environmental toxins that we are exposed much more to now than 30 years ago and certainly 50 years ago. If you look at what is in furniture and houses and rugs and, uh, you know, all kinds of things that we are around all the time, this creates stress on the body, and adaptogens can be helpful in helping your body manage that. So I'm not saying you should only use adaptogens short term. In fact, they are made to use for long-term stress. They're made to use indefinitely. However, you shouldn't use them instead of solving problems. I guess that's really my point. Don't use them as a way of avoiding solving the actual problem. Right? So with the HPA axis, here's what happens. Parts of the brain become alerted to danger. Parts of your sensory nervous system become alerted to danger. It can be direct danger, or it can be an interpretation. So the way that you perceive is really critical here. Your brain doesn't differ very much when you're perceiving danger versus there actually being real danger. And so sometimes you may perceive danger that isn't danger. You might think that you saw a bear, but it wasn't a bear. Or it might be an actual bear. Either way, your body will give you the same nerve or the same stress chemicals that will create a cascade of activity in your body to help you manage that stress. You can think of this as the fight or flight system. Easy way to think about it. Your body gives you what you need to either fight or to flight. The brain will alert you. The sensory nervous system will alert you. Your interpretation will alert the brain that hey, the brain is interpreting that there's danger here. And so you get signals that are sent to the brain. So those signals are sent to your hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is part of your limbic system. And so that is a key piece in the stress response, because the hypothalamus sort of directs the action, and it sends signal to the pituitary. And the signal basically says, we need some hormones that will help with stress. In fact, we need cortisol. So release that cortisol. So the hypothalamus tells the pituitary to get that release. The pituitary isn't the one that contains cortisol. The pituitary then sends a signal to the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands are the ones that contain the cortisol to release. So the adrenal glands take this adrenocorticotropin hormone, yes, say that 10 times fast, and they tell it, go ahead and release cortisol. And those stress hormones act really like lightning in the body, and they help prepare you to face danger. So you can sort of see here, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals. They release hormones down the way. We name those hormones, different names depending on where they're coming from, but it's essentially the same idea, release the cortisol. And once the cortisol levels are high enough in the blood so that the body knows that you've released them, there's negative feedback that then says, okay, we good. We've got cortisol going on, and you can turn off all of those release buttons. So then the hypothalamus will stop sending that signal, and the pituitary will stop sending that signal once they can sense there's enough cortisol happening. Adrenaline also gets released. Adrenaline actually gets released first. Cortisol is sort of like the second thing that gets released. Sort of like, let's throw adrenaline in the ring and see if you can take care of the issue, like in a minute, in 1 minute or less or so. So you get this immediate reaction, the heart pounding, the sweating, the breathing. You may have been on the freeway and had a near miss with a car, and you have that adrenaline reaction, and you're like, oh, and it takes you a little bit of time to recover. And so the reason it takes you time to recover is because this is a physiological reaction, not just a psychological reaction. And so the physiology means that you now have to metabolize adrenaline out of your system. You just have this big adrenaline dump, and it's not like it just magically goes away once you decide that you're not in danger. Your body has to metabolize it out. And so adrenaline can help you with a number of things that are really useful when you see a bear. You want to have all of these things to help you with that stress. Adrenaline, incredibly, incredibly helpful. Unfortunately, most of the stress we run into in our lives is actually not danger stress, it's perceived stress. It's like, here I am in front of the copy machine and I can't get it to work. And so now I'm stressed out. Well, is my life in danger? No. Is it helping me to have adrenaline? No, it's really not helping me solve the problem. And so our perception of stress is driving much of our stress these days, not actual bears. The body is really prepared for actual bears, but since it's not actual bears and we're reacting many, many times to normal, everyday, I guess, perceived stress, like the copy machine, like cars sideswiping us or almost running us off the road or people doing stupid things, we get stressed a lot. Norepinephrine, also a stress hormone, chemical, a neurotransmitter as well, released from both the adrenals and the brain. You can kind of think of this as like backup adrenaline. You know, in case your adrenal glands aren't working and you really need some adrenaline, you also have norepinephrine. And that can help manage your body and give you similar results, moving blood flow to where it's essentially needed, critical organs away from the periphery, really. Dealing with helping you with arousal so that you can better fight and flight. You have blood pressure that is increased in your periphery, but dilation of arteries and veins in your heart so that you can pump more blood, have better focus. And then we've got cortisol. Cortisol basically kicks in when, I just anthropomorphize all the time, like when the adrenaline is like, oh, you know what, I'm not solving this problem. It's been like a minute and we need to go. So then cortisol is like, all right, in for the long haul, boys, let's go. And so cortisol is more of a long haul type hormone that helps your body deal with a bigger stress. And so if something happens and adrenaline can solve it, then you're good. But if it's longer term, like more than a minute, then you're going to probably get cortisol kicking in. Then you have to metabolize out cortisol also. So it can take you some time to calm down. It might be an hour. It might be a couple days. It depends on your body and how reactive you are to these stress hormones, how well you can metabolize them out, and then also how much you keep going back to and revisiting that thing that happened and setting off those hormones again in your thinking because you're reliving it over and over and over. So chronic stress can really be a problem for your body. If you imagine how these short-term intended chemicals are helping you fight or flight, when they're not short-term and they continue to happen in your body, they really get in the way of normal functioning. They're not made for living with, they're made for, bears, okay? And so they affect your body and create problems where it's really useful to not have a lot of digestion happening when you're fighting a bear. If you're fighting long-term stress, you still need digestion, you need nourishment, you need your body to have normal metabolic processes. And so your body's attempt to continue to fight always comes at a cost, and you have to reduce the rest of the body functioning in order to kind of like pay for that cost. Survival will win. Non-survival functions don't win. And so reproductive functions are not a survival function. Reproduction happens when you're safe and nourished and well and happy. Reproduction doesn't happen when you're under chronic stress. It's not a very important thing for your body to do when you're under stress because survival is favored. It's always better. Digestion, we talked about. Your body actually becomes insulin resistant with cortisol. And so one of the things that cortisol does for you that's really wonderful when dealing with stress is it makes sure that you have enough glucose in your muscles. Well, that's super useful if you're going to fight or you're going to flight because you need glucose to run those muscles. And so the body's job with stress and cortisol, it's like, okay, so you need some glucose because I think it's a bear. And let's make sure the glucose stays there so that you can use it anytime you need to, because look, there's a bear. Okay, well, that's great. And one of the ways that glucose stays in your muscles, instead of being taken back into the cells or et cetera, is that you become insulin resistant. So the body becomes insulin resistant as a way of keeping glucose available kind of chronically. However, you know, there's no bear, and so here you are now insulin resistant and you're stress eating, and so you're going to develop diabetes. This I'm not exaggerating. This can happen. We've seen evidence of highly stressed people having a much higher rate of diabetes, even though their eating is not different. So adaptogens help your body manage those effects of stress, and they protect all the effects of cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, but primarily cortisol, because that's the long-term stress hormone. They really help protect the body from those long-term effects. And so there's a huge range of medicinal action in the sense that adaptogens can help with the digestive system, they help with the liver, they help with the heart, they help with the brain, they help with the immune system, wide range. That's part of the definition of an adaptogen, is it's a wide range of medicinal action. Of all the plants that are out there, if you're going to classify plants, you can classify them according to the family that they're from. You can classify them according to, are they, you know, plants that we eat or plants that we don't eat. You can classify them, are they orange or yellow, all kinds of ways of classifying. And so adaptogens, that's another method of classifying. And here what you're doing is you're classifying on the basis of the medicinal action of the plant. And those plants with the widest range of medicinal action are called adaptogens. It's a little bit subjective. I'll explain a little on the next slide about that. And so sometimes you can have people disagree on whether or not a plant is considered an adaptogen or not, but they will help support your body. And so you can see in this graph, when you have the regular stress impact, you know, your autonomic nervous system is your sympathetic nervous system stimulated. You know, you're there in fight or flight. Adaptogens can help kind of lower that effect so that you're not so completely stressed out. They will help stimulate you a little bit so that you don't have that, I can't think of the word, that trough, that, you know, you just have this drop in energy. They can help with managing that. They want to return your body to homeostasis. That is the goal. Let's get back to normalizing function. Let's go back to homeostasis. And so again, remember, your job is to solve the problem, and the adaptogen's job is to help protect your body and your brain and your mood and your mind and your functioning while you return to homeostasis. And so it depends on our understanding of what herbs do, whether or not we classify them as an adaptogen. Depends on how much we understand about them. If you find an herb and not very many people know what this herb does, you can't say it's not an adaptogen, because you need to see the evidence of what it does. And so some people have different goals or different criteria for what a plant needs to do in order to be an adaptogen. There's no 100% agreed upon definition. Some people have very stringent definitions, and so they consider far fewer plants to be adaptogens. Some people kind of feel like, well, you know, if it does more than 3 things, then it's an adaptogen. And they've got a lot of adaptogens in their results show a lot of adaptogens. So generally, people generally agree for the most part on a list of adaptogens, but you might see some people saying, well, this is not a primary adaptogen, it's a secondary adaptogen, or it's a probable adaptogen. So just know that this term is not totally agreed upon what it means in terms of specific plants, but people do agree on what adaptogens do. They help protect the body from stress. They help normalize function. They are non-toxic. You can use them for a long time. There's maybe 25 to 50 known adaptogens. People can agree on really like across the board on, maybe 20 of them. If you look at 50, there's going to be some people who say, you're really pushing it. That's not really an adaptogen. And so I've seen lists, all kinds of lists, and some of them include herbs that I think, well, gosh, that's not really an adaptogen, is it? I don't think so. I'm not an expert, but that's what I think. So the most famous one you may have known is ginseng. Everyone's kind of heard of ginseng. You see it in the gas station, in all the energy soda, ginseng. And so we have a really weird view of what ginseng is. We think of it as energy, stimulant. Oh, that's going to make you like have so much energy. You're just going to go crazy. That's not really what ginseng does. That's what the popular understanding of it is. And so again, we're faced with this really reductionistic attitude toward what herbs do. Ginseng is an extremely useful adaptogen. In our culture, we just don't get it. And also what's hilarious is there's not even enough of it in an energy drink to really help you benefit from the ginseng. So it's sort of like there is a name. Like a lot of herbs, we sort of think, look, we want name recognition. And we're sort of dumb to the idea of therapeutic level or therapeutic benefit. And so you look at a bottle and you're like, what's in this? And then you see all this stuff in there like, this is good stuff. Look at all this stuff in here. When most of that stuff is just sprinkling. It's like, we're in the factory. We want to make something that looks good. So let's just sprinkle a lot of stuff in it. And the whole idea of therapeutic level, therapeutic benefit, that's completely lost. A lot of it is, what will sell. So you got to be careful in your consumption of any herb, and I think particularly adaptogens, because adaptogens are becoming much, much, much more powerful. I've been working with them for about 10 years, and in the last 10 years, they've gone from they weren't at zero when I started, for sure. But boy, you look online now for adaptogens, and it's everybody wants to do it. So here's an incomplete list of some adaptogens. There are plants that I think of as adaptogens that are not on here. There are plants that other people think of adaptogens, not on here. But just so you can see, and we're going to talk about these 5 this week: ashwagandha, holy basil today, maca, rhodiola, and ginseng. Some things to know about using adaptogens. First, they are not a panacea. So in other words, you can't take them to make up for a deficient life. That's not the idea. They will help. Yeah, if you have a deficient life, they will certainly help. It's not like they're not going to work for you. But you can't think that you can fix your deficient life with adaptogens. Nothing is that powerful. No plant is that powerful. And so the idea is if you have a problem, you're supposed to fix the problem. That's the goal. Problem comes up, you fix the problem, and then you return to homeostasis. And so using them as an indiscriminate cure-all, my diet's really horrible, so I'll just have adaptogens instead. And then thinking that that's going to work for you in the long term, it's not going to work very well for you. They are much, much more helpful when your life is getting put back together. And so they can't fix a poor lifestyle. They're not useful or appropriate for pushing more out of your body. You can't really say, okay, I'm going to go to medical school, and so I'll survive by taking adaptogens. Now, actually, I would recommend you took adaptogens if you're in medical school, for sure, because they will help you, but they're not a substitute for self-care. And so you can't just drop out self-care, and you can't expect you to work beyond endurance, beyond your capacity forever using adaptogens as fuel. You have to work at your capacity, not faster than you have strength, right? That's the thing. And so all herbs will work when your body has the things that it needs to function. And so if you have a decent diet, decent sleep, exercise, hydration, herbs will actually work much better in your body. If they are fighting caffeine and, fast food and couch potato, you won't see as much of a benefit from adaptogens because they're like fighting. So I think of it as if you can just all get yourselves in the same direction. So everybody's working in the same direction. Adaptogens can really help you move in that direction instead of having to fight you moving in the opposite direction and then you depending on using adaptogens as your panacea. All right, we talked about how there's really no agreed on definition of an adaptogen, but they do help people adapt to stress. They support normalizing your metabolic function. So the way you break down food and use it to create new things in your body and live, that's metabolism, your life, really. Helping restore balance. A lot of times you get out of balance when you're stressed because stress kind of hijacks your body so that you're really looking at fight or flight. And so some of those normal functions like reproductive functions, for example, endocrine system, the immune system, they are not functioning in that same way because of stress. And so adaptogens can help those normalize again, restore that balance to those functions. Increasing your resistance to stress and illness. And so when we say resistance to stress, what we mean is that they are helping with the impact of stress. So it's not so bad, so that you're not so vulnerable to the impact of stress, both psychologically and physiologically. All adaptogens are non-toxic. That is part of the agreed upon definition that everybody does have. They are non-toxic. You can take them every day with no impact. No, they're building up in me and I have to stop. None of that. Adaptogens, like, you could eat carrots every day. You're not going to have an issue with it. So they're going to have a normalizing influence. They're non-toxic and they help give you a non-specific. That means it's not just the digestive system. Non-specific, so like a whole body resistance to stress. They are also multi-directional. So this is another concept that kind of breaks people's brains when they're only looking at it from the perspective of Western medicine. And so if all you've seen is Western medicine and then you run across this idea of multi-directionality or bidirectionality, sometimes people call it, your brain may just kind of, freeze up for a moment. And you might just start finding yourself screaming, snake oil, without any thinking whatsoever. So we like to reduce plants to doing one thing. And that's one reason why people say snake oil when you have a plant that does more than one thing, because they're used to drugs that do one thing and not, 12 things. And so because herbs act so differently in the body as compared to pharmaceuticals, it's easy to say, well, they're wrong, or you must be making that up. And it's another form of intellectual imperialism. That idea that I can understand your culture spontaneously and easily without having to work at it. That's that idea of intellectual imperialism that Hoffman talks about. And so here we've got this kind of I don't know what you could call it, but it's sort of an imperialistic idea that I know how the body works and I know how health works. And what you say doesn't make any sense because it doesn't work in my perspective. Instead of learning from other perspectives and trying to open your mind to these other concepts and seeing them as they are instead of seeing them as not as good as my concepts. And so we tend to reduce plants to having one or two actions. It either raises blood pressure or it lowers it. That's a great example. If you say, well, it can both raise and lower blood pressure depending on what your body needs, then people just go, oh, it's obviously a placebo. It's just snake oil. It's just stupid. Nobody can do that. Plants don't do that. You're making it up. When actually that's not accurate at all. Plants do actually do those things. Example, in ginseng, there are two ginsenosides. That's one of the components of ginseng. They've named them ginsenosides, and there are a number of them. So they have different names. Two of them, one is called RG1 and one of them is called RB1. And so RG1 can stimulate or raise blood pressure, and RB1 can calm or lower blood pressure. They're all in the same plant. So then you have to start thinking about if you have both of these things in the same plant, They don't necessarily just neutralize each other. I mean, that's very simple thinking, and you're applying it to plants without knowing anything about it. You just make this assumption that you understand how it works, and therefore that's how it works. Again, that's like an imperialistic, or, that's a really problematic way of thinking. And so what we do see is that in some people with high blood pressure, ginseng can help lower that blood pressure. In people with low blood pressure, that's a problematic. Ginseng can help raise the blood pressure to normal levels. And so the idea here is that it normalizes body functionings. This is what adaptogens do. They normalize body functionings. And so you can easily find somebody who doesn't know very much who will say, oh my gosh, you have high blood pressure. You can't take that. You can't take that adaptogen because there are parts of it that raise blood pressure. Well, that's not how adaptogens work. They normalize. They normalize. They are smarter than you think. Your body is smarter than you think. You don't understand how it works. All right, if you're looking at purchasing adaptogens, I use adaptogens every day. I think that they're extraordinarily useful, and they have made a tremendous, absolute change in my life. And so I'm a big advocate for using adaptogens. I'm also a huge supporter of buying the ones that are made well, the right ones. So you have to be really careful. You can't just go on Amazon and buy the cheapest thing, because who knows what you're getting. These days, more and more places are using labs to test the herbs, and they're finding all kinds of things. You can find companies that have really great testing that show great results, and then you can have people that pull products off the shelves, generally the shelves of like big box stores, but not always. Sometimes some of the popular sellers on Amazon, you pull those off, and then they're finding there's really no evidence that there's hardly any of those herbs in that pill. Like, we don't know what's in there. So you want to make sure that you know the company you're dealing with. You want to make sure that the company that you buy from is a company that knows how to do this. So you want their work to be obvious. You need test results, etc. Adulteration with other herbs can be a problem. If you have people that want to give you the cheapest product, they may not be able to discriminate between one herb and another. And you might have herbs that look alike get mixed in, and then that's going to adulterate your product. So you're not having just the adaptogen, you're having whatever looked like the adaptogen that was in that field. Making sure that the experts are what are the people who are identifying the botanicals that are in your product. Are they using the right part of the herb? Like we're going to talk about ashwagandha in a minute. Ashwagandha has berries. And so an ignorant person might think, oh, ashwagandha berries, that would be great. Let's sell ashwagandha berries. And so they put it in a bottle, and people are like, oh, ashwagandha, that's good for you. Yeah, we like that. Ashwagandha berries, well, that's cool. And so they take those. But the berry is actually not nearly as useful in ashwagandha as the root is. So if you don't know that, then you might be purchasing a bunch of ashwagandha berries that are not going to do for you what ashwagandha root will do for you. Is it harvested at the right time? And sometimes this literally means the right time of day, the right time of month, the right time in terms of the plant's progress. Sometimes you want to harvest things when they're in full flower. Sometimes you want to harvest them at the end of the season. It depends on the plant. And centuries, thousands of years, in many cases, have gone into understanding how to best harvest to maximize potency. And so you need to pay attention to these things. Is it prepared correctly? If it's best when it's been dried, then you certainly want it so that it was well dried. If it's best when it's fresh, then you want it to be fresh and not moldy, etc. Has it been standardized in terms of quality? So a lot of times herbalists would know if something was good quality based on look, based on smell, based on viscosity, etc. And so those things are all things to take into account when you're looking at a product. Price is not a great indicator of value. So you have to look at something else other than price. If you want to buy the least expensive or something that's relatively inexpensive, you may be trading off effectiveness. And so in that case, you might be buying something that's cheap, but you're getting nothing from it. And so what was the point of spending the money at all? It's much better to buy something that you know works, that other people will say, yes, this definitely works. I've had great experiences with this. I can attest to this actually working. There's your value. Your value is, what is it doing for you? It's not how little did it cost you or getting the best deal. Okay, so coming up, we're going to talk about ashwagandha, and I'll end this video now so you can just watch about adaptogens on your own, or if you want to repeat one of these two, you don't have to look at two different videos. All right.